Michael Makovsky joins us now, President and CEO of the U.S. Institute for National Security of America and a leading Washington, D.C. policy and educational organization focused on the U.S. defense and national security issues in the Middle East. So, Michael, welcome. First off, President Trump is meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today. I don't think this is just, hey, what have you been doing? How are you doing? How's your family? They're going to talk tactics and substance, aren't they?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Absolutely. It's notable that this is Netanyahu's seventh visit to meet with President Trump since President Trump was elected. They're talking concrete stuff. They're not here just to hang out.
Yeah, I mean, one is Hamas has said again, we are not giving up our weapons, and we're in phase 2 of the Gaza rebuild. Some things are going well. We have other people involved. We have the Board of Peace. We are working hard. I know they got this building with one floor is Americans, one floor is Israelis, others a representative from the region. So they're trying to get to the point where they can start rebuilding Gaza, but that's going to be an issue. But the main thing is on Iran. Why do you think the prime minister said to the president publicly about 3 weeks ago, not now, Mr. President?
Yeah. So look, first of all, I think President Trump deserves a lot of credit. He's the first president since the Islamic Revolution, which they just celebrated their 47th anniversary, which is not something the regime might be celebrating it, but most of the Iranian people and certainly most of what we used to call the free world certainly lament. And I think Trump deserves a lot of credit that he's the first president to publicly support the demonstrators. And there have been protesters against the regime over the decades. Obama and Biden ignored them, and President Trump said, look, we support the people, and he warned the regime. So what this is about, really, so then he wanted to do something. And because I think President Trump is we've seen this many times, like with the hostages, he hates to see innocent people be killed or taken into tunnels and things like that, and killed or oppressed. So he wanted to act, but I think the Israelis said, look, if we're going to do this right, we need a little more time, and we need to prepare. The Israelis and the United States needs to as well. And I think that's what we've seen. So now we have the United States has a lot more assets in the region. Israel's had time to prepare. So I think they're really focusing on coordinating what they're going to do if President Trump decides to attack.
We need, the president says, I'm thinking about bringing another aircraft carrier in. Do we need it?
I don't think so. I'm not here to second guess our military planners, so I'll defer to them. And I think the U.S. approach generally is to be extra prepared. Israel's approach is to prepare, obviously, but sometimes Israel's used to, I think, reacting a little more quickly. I don't think we have to. And you don't know. Time will tell whether it was a ruse or it was really something we really need to do. But what it does suggest to me to bring all these assets is that we're not just talking about maybe like Midnight Hammer, which was a great thing where we brought the B-2s to finish off the nuclear program that the Israelis started doing in June. But we might be thinking about it. It suggests possibly a little longer campaign by both countries. Yeah,
because they want to make sure these guys don't stay in power. I'm sure you guys know better than most that they are actually going after and killing all the protesters they can, including ones are in the hospital. They are going to find them in the hospitals and are killing them. They arrested 207 people, and they've been executed over the last 3 weeks. And now they're just arresting other people where they torture them in prison. They will do anything to stay in power. They're remarkably unpopular with their own population who is not armed, and they still courageously continue to protest over the weekend, reportedly. And the president has said, we got your back. But of course, we didn't have assets in place. I just can't see a scenario where the president says, shake my hand, we got a deal. I think this ends in some type of military action. The question is, between the intelligence Israel has and we have we identified somebody we could work with the day after?
First of all, I completely agree with you. I don't think after everything that happened, as you correctly pointed out, I think it'd be very hard for President Trump to just say, hey, I made a deal on their nuclear program and, things are good and et cetera, et cetera. I think he knows that he can't. It'd be a tough thing for him to do after he, as you point out, his credibility, I think, is kind of on the line here to punish the regime for the slaughter of their people, for the mass slaughter of their people, and to do what we can, along with the Israelis, to help weaken the regime, to facilitate the Iranian people to bring it down. Excuse me. But it will be ultimately the Iranian people that bring it down, but we could help weaken the regime. So about what you're asking, I think it's a tough thing. That's a tough thing to game, because I think a lot of people believe it's a common view that even if you take out the supreme leader, you have the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard forces that will take over. I think it's probably a little too early on that, and I think the key thing is you want to weaken the regime levers of power, including leaders of the forces like the Basij and the IRGC and some of the military that are supporting the regime, and then just really kind of do what you can to help facilitate the people to bring it down.
Michael, for people that out there says, well, we don't want a war in the Middle East, and we should be focusing on China, we're not going to be able to focus on China like we should if Iran continues to foment violence and terror in the region, especially with our alliance with Israel. We're going to need a significant presence there and talk less about the economy, more about the military. If you want to really pivot to China, deal with this problem once and for all. It's been 40 years. The only thing consistent is they do everything possible to hurt our objectives and to kill our people.
Look, I agree. Actually, you could even argue that this could be part of a pivot to China because the Iranian regime is maybe the Chinese closest friend in the Mideast. There's the Chinese are selling missile technology, all sorts of things to the Iranians. So actually, if you want to weaken the Chinese, you want to take care of the Iranians. And also, I think the Chinese and the Russians will see that if we don't address this issue, especially everything that the president said, we have your back, we're on our way, we're locked and loaded, things like that. I think if he doesn't do something, it will hurt our credibility, and therefore it will weaken ourselves with the Chinese and the Russians.
So let's talk about the Chinese. Let's talk about the Chinese in Ukraine. Yesterday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov continued to explicitly blame the United States on February 10th for the lack of progress in ending Russia's war against Ukraine, and reinvoked the spring of 2022 Istanbul talks to justify Russia's rejection of Ukraine's meaningful security. They went on to say that they think we are now the enemy of Russia. Lavrov, as you know, speaks for Putin pretty succinctly. He said he claimed the U.S. policy towards Russia under Trump are moving in the wrong direction. So, and this is exactly what Trump says. Actions rather than words demonstrate that the United States remains an adversary to Russia. Yes, Trump's always said he's taking a somewhat conciliatory tone with his words, but his actions and his latest move, telling India, stop buying Russian oil, and they are. They're going to start buying it from us. Russia looks at us as hostile. To me, that's the president saying, I don't need to get in your face to act against you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't help but smile when you repeat this because I'm happy to hear in some ways that the Russian foreign minister is saying things like that. To me, that suggests the U.S. foreign policy is going in the correct way. It's obviously ludicrous accusation by Lavrov. The real problem here is the Russians, and I think once Trump deals with the Iran issue now, I think it'd be good for him. I think to pivot and start putting even more pressure on the Russians with more, tightening, preventing more of their oil exports and things. That's the only way I think we have to come. We got to get to an end to this war, obviously. And I think one way to do it is the main way to do it is to put a lot more pressure on the Russians.
And by the way, if you think this is a Ukraine problem, yesterday NATO jets intercepted another Russian jet fighter right near the Baltic Sea. So they're trying to go into the hinge of the net, and breach the borders of almost every NATO nation. And we're seeing reports that if the Russians were to invade, that the UK has 4 days worth of armaments, that the Germans are incapable of repelling any Russian military action. So there's a vulnerability of NATO, and I think that they should realize that Russia is not going away. But it would be great to see the president ratchet up the amount of arms, give them the tomahawks, and let the Russians know we're not backing away. So I appreciate it, Michael. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Yeah, we'll see what's next.